Hi everyone, my name is Varun Gupta. I'm a photographer for the last 15 plus years, and more recently I'm preoccupied with alternative and analog photography practices. I love to work in my darkroom and work with chemical process as much as I can. I'm here today as the director of the Chennai Photo Biennale. I'm one of its co-founders. And the Biennale really came into existence as a reaction, to Chennai, to me creating public art activations through another project, Art Chennai, which preceded the Chennai Photo Biennale. And through a network of photographers, friends, people in the arts, we all came together with the idea of establishing CPB in 2015, and the first edition we came together as a pilot in 2016. So I think addressing, the first question, which is often posed to us, is this idea of the Binal versus the festival format, and what are the differences? And I think these words have now become quite interchangeable, even in the scene of the arts. But I think if you look at the roots, I think Biennale comes from the word biennial, and it references that more time. You give yourself 2 years to create an event, to curate, to also commission artists, and to produce exhibitions of supposedly a larger scale. And that's one possible way of looking at that difference. But often festivals undertake projects that are more Biennale-esque and vice versa. And as a Biennale, we often do smaller projects within our festival or within the Biennale that represents more of a festival ambience. And for us, those two are interchangeable. What's important is that we're committed to, every 2 years establishing sort of this environment within which photography is the hero. There's a lot of talks, discussions, panel conversations, critique, portfolio reviews. All of those come together to make the experience of what we call the Chennai Photo Biennale. And but when it comes to audience, and pulling back for a second, I think there is this dichotomy, and because we call ourselves as Chennai Photo Biennale, we've oriented and positioned ourselves very much in the city of Chennai in Tamil Nadu of India, in the South Indian sort of state of India. Chennai is a coastal city. It has a lot of industrialization. It's known as an ancient port, and there is a lot of traditional culture that sort of predates any of the contemporary art movement that's here in the city. And it's in this context that the Chennai Photo Biennale is really born. And so when we talk of audience, we see ourselves talking to multiple audiences. There is the arts visitor, there is the global art visitor who's seeking out, and those with photography interests are seeking out photography art events. There is the arts audiences of India who are coming to appreciate what a contemporary arts event can do, how it helps them network, the experiences that it provides them, and they are showing up. And then there is the local audience. When I say local, there is the local audience who are the citizens of Chennai who are coming in through, or who have come in through our venues in the past editions, who are as much fascinated by the venue as possibly the artwork within the venue. And then there is the greater Tamil diaspora, and the Tamil diaspora is global, and it is very South Asian. There is a lot of Tamil population all over the world, particularly in Malaysia and other neighboring countries, and all of this diaspora is very mobile. So I think when we talk about the local population, we're talking about this dichotomy, about the belonging of this Tamil diaspora, of the city of Chennai, the audience that's here, for whom the Biennale is a one-off experience or a one-of-a-kind experience that they physically enjoy while being in this environment. And then there is the art visitor who comes in seeking the Biennale, seeking the photographers and the artists whose work. And I think this regionality is something that's existed. The artist community, and particularly the photography artist community in this region, has been very mixed. People have traveled to Chobi Mela, to Pathshala, they travel to Kathmandu, and so this movement very much happens within the artists, and I think it's the audience who often thinks of this as different geographies, and the artists don't. And so this is an interesting position that we take as a Biennale, that when we're thinking of the work and the artists, it's about looking at the region. And I think that leads me into the sort of the second question about how do we position ourselves in this region. And I think what's wonderful is that there has been an awakening. In the last 5 to 10 years, maybe a little bit more than that, there's been this sort of rapid awakening of the photography community, and it's a vast community. It's a number of different practitioners doing different types of things in photography or with different varied interests. And this community has woken up very rapidly in some senses. And there is more things happening in the ecosystem. So there's, like I mentioned, the Chobe Mela, there is the Kathmandu, Photo Kathmandu. These are very important players in this ecosystem in which photography has been sort of seen, shared, witnessed, produced. And I think this ecosystem is what the Chennai Photo Biennale really wanted to is become a part of and anchor in one sense in the Indian context, right? There were players before us, who are for many reasons haven't existed, and it's quite unfortunate because we really, as practitioners, I really enjoyed having a Delhi Photo Festival to visit every 2 years, and we came in that void to create that space for photographers to come and explore the art form and the limits in which it's being pushed into the media realm, into the found image, the created image, the moving image, and all of this comes together. So I think that's the ecosystem in which we position ourselves in South Asia. But one of the positions, let's say, that we've tried to take in the particularly last 2 years, and more so during COVID, is that we would like to become a window for the West, and the traditional West or North, let's say, to look at South Asia, the global South, of which we are very much a part. And when I say look, it's about talent discovery. We've been to more than enough festivals, environments globally where there is a very limited knowledge of photographers, the scene, the evolution, the collectives, the kind of work that's been produced, and also the archives. And I think that's where we like to position ourselves more, is collaborate more internationally with festivals, with institutions, with museums, to bring curators, to bring, the gallerists, and let them discover talent from this region, which is really like boiling over at this point. It's amazing. You're discovering more and more talent, and as you see the awards coming out every few weeks, you see more and more recognition, particularly for artists from the south of India, which I find really interesting and very relevant to the Chennai Photo Biennale's own context. And then, coming more to the Biennale and what's up, and I think there's been several hurdles with all festivals globally. I think all art makers, producers, festival managers, even galleries, museums and spaces have suffered. And that's a shared experience, and I think it's been, in that shared experience, there's also been a lot of strength, because a lot of learning has come collectively from other places, including for us. And we've taken the time during this time to, of course, really push the online model. But what's been interesting is the learning is also in the space of what I referenced earlier as audience development. This global arts audience can now, hop. They can hop all over the world to events, to conversations, and participate in things that were never possible for them to do before. And that's really something that we've enjoyed doing. Very early, I think a bunch of curators from the region, South Asia, were, in early 2020, we were all together in Germany and Switzerland, looking at art museums, looking at the Mannheim Biennale of photography. And then COVID hit, and all of us were stuck in our different countries in South Asia and our different cities and homes. And what was really wonderful that the Chennai Photo Biennale team was able to do is connect with the Mannheim Biennale, who had to shut down, open up audience, and then have a series of curated walkthroughs for all our audiences, the Indian, the South Asian audiences, to experience in the Mannheim Biennale and vice versa. And there was a lot of conversations that came out as a result that now go into what we're doing for our next edition. So I think that was our learnings from the COVID period, that the permeance of audience and then the ability of the audience to show up and to experience is no longer mitigated by distance, by affordability. And the ones who are interested will now go and seek and find. Yes, we're all Zoom fatigued, we're all exhausted, of looking at our screens, but that doesn't change the fact that this is very important material and conversations that's now become universally accessible in ways that was never before. And we're taking a feather from that cap, thinking forward into 2021, third edition of the Chennai Photo Biennale. we're very much hopeful, and in conversations with the Tamil Nadu government, they've reaffirmed, our desire to have a physical expression of the Biennale. We're definitely going to occupy some, if not all, the heritage spaces we had envisioned for the third edition. We would very much like that these heritage venues are open to the public throughout the day. We will take into account, precautions of maybe appointments in the smaller venues. But there are large cavernous spaces we've used as well, where it'll be easier to control visitors, and the mobility of the visitors within the venue. But the physicality very much remains central to the experience of the Biennale. And looking back to our own roots, public art has been, I think my roots as a photographer, and I like to think of myself as a public art activist, but very much the roots of the Chennai Photo Biennale. We started with our first edition in a park, in a train station, and in a gallery. The second edition had the beach as an additional sort of attraction, and pushing the boundaries of these public venues has always been our interest. And so I think that's really going to be a wonderful space in which we'll be able to do a lot. And referencing some of the other festivals and biennales happening in this COVID time, one has seen this desire to go out onto the streets and produce artworks and exhibitions in public space for people on the streets to experience. And I can't think of a better way to develop audience than to develop it on the street, with the people on the street who are just, going about their daily lives, and suddenly you can occupy their public space for a minute, come into their mind space and give them something they haven't seen. So what you can look forward to is hopefully large, significant public space heritage venues in Chennai. Also some more open spaces like beaches, parks, train stations, as well as streets that we haven't tried before. And we will look to possibly fragment the Biennale in that sense, where large cavernous venues with multiple artworks might not be possible because of the pandemic, and we will look to spread the Biennale out geographically around the city of Chennai to different neighborhoods with smaller interventions and smaller galleries, people's homes, or even just open courtyards or cul-de-sacs. And I think that's an interesting space that we're going to have to roll with the punches and adapt. And I think all festival practitioners, are working with a plan A, B, C, D at this stage, and so are we. And we're going to have to play more, be more flexible as we get closer to the Biennale. But definitely we want to create something physical, because that's been our roots. And that's the main reason why we chose not to have a purely virtual expression in 2020, which we could well have. One of the interesting byproducts of COVID, in addition to, of course, giving us more time as an organization to reflect and really grow our other programs, which maybe I'll touch on if there's time, but it's been to enable the curatorial team. So it's been a challenge for the curatorial team. We have 4 curators, Boaz Levin, Kirsten Meinke, both from Germany. We have Bhuma Padmanabhan and Orko Datto from India, both, all 4, emerging, very sort of exciting talent from the world of photography and curation. We have a mix of artist curator, professional curator, academic curators. So it's a very, very, very interesting mix that's come together, and they've put together a wonderful theme. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But they were really challenged with the pandemic. To curate, first of all, to go back to the artists you've curated and invited to say, look, things have changed. Then to tell them, look, we want you in the Biennale, but we don't know which venues and in what size and what scale we are going to be able to exhibit. So I think the artists have been wonderful, but the curators have really pushed their boundaries a bit in thinking about the Biennale. And as a result, and they went into COVID with a theme. In fact, they told us their theme literally 10 days before COVID hit in Mannheim when we were together. And then COVID hit, and their theme, which is called The Maps of Disquiet, which we announced in December of last year, it reflects so much about what's happened post-pandemic as well. But it is really about questioning this idea of borders, of nationality, of regions, whose water, whose land, and reflecting globally the exigencies of our time. And I think there's so much common ground with what's happening all over the world. And I'll give you an example. I mean, with gender, I think today gender is a subject that's boiling over globally, and it's in the Indian context, in the American context, in the European context, it's coming to the fray, and conversations have moved at different levels in different places, and that's what we hope the idea of Maps at Disquiet can do. Chennai was the site of the launch of the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, from which began the process of mapping the continent of India at that time. And so in that context, Maps of Disquiet is sort of looking at another way of mapping. This Tamil identity can be mapped. Exigencies such as gender can be mapped. So I think it's about different, wearing different lenses and filters to read the maps of today and what is relevant. But we are building up to a December 2021 launch. I very much invite you to come to Chennai in physical capacities if you can't experience us virtually. We will, of course, have a virtual experience, and there will be a lot of talks, conversations, and discussions that will possibly exist in a pure virtual format as well, where audiences can engage from all over the world. But yeah, come to Chennai if you can. The Biennale continues to be one of the core activities of the CPB Foundation, but we are engaged throughout the year in different conversations and projects. So we have something called the CPB Learning Lab, with which we'll be putting out some of the collaborations, like with the Polis project, and the idea is that in the Biennale is the larger than life, once in 2 years, big public art event, but the community of photography has to be engaged throughout the year, and we learned this between our first and second edition, where we weren't able to sustain as an organization. And so one of our challenges to ourselves and with the community is that we want to make sure that we're having lots of conversations all the time. So you referenced this project we did with the Confederation of Indian Industry called My 2020 Hero. I think that was a project about memory making through photography. We see the medium of photography is quite expansive, and there are people at different positions and points in this spectrum. There is the young learner coming straight out of school or college who has just gotten a taste for the medium with their mobile or digital camera. There is the commercial photographer who engages every day to make a living. There is the arts practitioner who is dabbling with the medium. Then there is the documentary photographer. There is the archivist. There are the curators. So this ecosystem of photography and the lens, and we see now photography as a broader landscape of lens-based practice, sort of. And so in that landscape, the CPB Foundation, participates with the Biennale in a larger sense, with big events and collaborations, and of course the exhibitions, which are key. But throughout the year, we really want to have different kinds of conversations. So we talk to each audience in its own sort of programming. So, I'm an alternative photographer. I'm teaching workshops in Goa, this month. And so like that, we like to have different conversations based on people's interests. And we encourage people to reach out and connect, with their interests, and, we adapt to those. It's going to be 8 weeks of programming, essentially. And we expect there will be an unconference in which, where each week we'll have a different subject. We will have critical discussions. But then there will be a lot of practical, participative projects. And, an underlying work that we always work on is education, primary education of school children from marginalized and underserved communities. And that will sort of underlie the entire Biennale experience, where there will be thousands of children who will be coming into venues, participating in projects, and also creating images of the time.